Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I could just have your attention for a few minutes, we're about to start our program tonight. I wanted to begin by thanking you for being here and thanking Planned Parenthood for partnering with us. Annabelle Scheinberg is here from Planned Parenthood. And if the board members of Planned Parenthood that are here can just raise your hand so we can acknowledge your work that you do in the field every day. Thank you so much. This is a very important and timely film. It premiered at Sundance this year. It won the Special Jury Award for Social Impact. And in addition to being a great film, I think that in the 15 years that I've been making films, this is the best visual poster that has been made, a graphic image for a film. So this was a team that was very smart and very strategic, and they have a great outreach program that they're bringing this film around the country in time for the Supreme Court decision, and doing community outreach in rural communities, big cities, all over the country. It's very aggressive and very impressive and very ambitious. We're very delighted tonight to have Willie Parker, who's the subject of the film, who's an abortion care provider from Alabama. He's also a friend of David Turok, who is our own, not quite native son, he's from New York, but he is our esteemed abortion provider here in Utah. So if you have questions after the screening about anything happening here locally, David will be in the audience to address those questions. How many of you heard Doug Fabrizio's interview? All right, great. That was an amazing interview. Dawn Porter, the director of the film, said it was the best interview that she's had with the film so far, and we just want to say thank you to Doug for curating this series with us and for being such a great steward of nonfiction narrative storytelling. And just a couple of quick announcements. I know many of you know we had a fire on March 29th. We were past the $40,000 threshold in our GoFundMe campaign, so we're very excited and appreciative to all of you. We are reviewing a lease for a possible new home to relocate. We'll have an announcement about that in the next couple of weeks. So we're moving ahead, and we couldn't have done it without you, and we really appreciate it. And we also appreciate the support of our ongoing sponsors, which you will see in the credits. I would like to say that Jorge from Rico's and Frida's has offered to do a Fiesta del Fuego fundraiser. It's a community fundraiser. It's in our program on May 21st, a Saturday. It's $25. All the proceeds will go to rebuilding the film center. So if you love him and his work and his incredible story and what he's done for our community, he's giving back again to us, and we want to thank him publicly and invite you all to come. With that, I will welcome onto the stage Doug Fabrizio from KUER RadioWest.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. So, those of you who heard the conversation with Dawn Porter, she tells this story about she was in Mississippi and she was working on another piece. And I think she saw something in the newspaper or something that in the state of Mississippi there was one abortion provider. And it wasn't far from where she was, and so she thought, I'm going to go visit them. So she went there, and that's where she met Willie Parker, whom you'll meet in about an hour and a half. And she was, I think Willie Parker is the idea for the film. She's talked about the fact that in some ways this is about an issue, of course, but she builds it in some ways around Willie Parker and some other really, really remarkable people. And he was this really impressive man, Harvard educated, had a fellowship at Northwestern, taught at Northwestern. And on his weekends and days off, he was traveling to the American South to provide a service that is legal, but is becoming in these places, as you'll see, as you probably already know, more and more difficult. It's a profile piece. I mean, that's what makes it, I think, to me, a powerful documentary is that it's told through personal stories. It's not just a polemic. You can see, and this is what she said on the show, she wanted to know what it was like on the ground for these clinic workers and Dr. Parker and these other people. What's it like? And you'll see. So stick around, please, for our conversation. We have microphones there, so if you have a comment or a question for Willie Parker, you can ask it. Before the film, though, we've been showing you these RadioWest shorts. How many of you know Gerda Saunders? Does anyone know Gerda Saunders? Lucky you. She is an extraordinary woman, teacher here in Utah. Wonderful South African woman who has a husband whose name is Peter and a terrific family, and she has not Alzheimer's, but a form of progressive dementia. And she's been writing about it. She's actually writing a book right now. She blogs about it. She talks about what this experience is like. And so we at KUER got in contact with her. We've had her on the program before, and we wanted to do this video series about her reflections on what it's like to go through something like this. So that's the short you'll see before the film. Thanks very much for coming. Stick around for Dr. Parker. Thanks again. Thanks for sticking around. Meet Dr. Willie Parker.
Sorry, I had to take a picture of you guys.
You couldn't resist. Dr. Parker, I wanted to start with, I read this recently, a quote that you had said not so long ago. You said, "For me, this is one of the first times in my life where my values, my skills, and my chosen craft have come together." And then we hear in the film you say, "I think my work is rooted in my faith. Gives me a sense of duty." Would you talk about that sense of duty?
Sure. The rejection of the notion that religious understanding only creates barriers and limitations and prohibitions, but that it doesn't create duties and responsibilities and opportunities. For me, that I came to appreciate as I attempted to go deeper into my religious understanding, and ended up in a place where compassion was more compelling than the prohibitions that might define my religious identity to other people who says, well, he must be a Christian because he behaves this way, or he doesn't do that. When I interact with folk who oppose abortion on the basis of religious understanding, and then I feel called to help my fellow human being, that's what I mean by my faith calls me to do this work. And if some of you may know my personal story around that call for me came from listening to a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King, where he described what made the Good Samaritan good. And the story goes that there's a traveler fallen and was being passed by. He had been robbed and was left on the side of the road. People were passing by the busy highway. And Dr. King took that story and said that what made the Good Samaritan good was whereas everyone passed the person by and asked what happened to me for stopping to help, the Samaritan reversed the question of concern and asked what will happen to this person if I don't stop to help him. And to me, it demonstrates that principle of being other-minded or having a sense of responsibility that comes out of your religious and spiritual understanding. So given that I had no desire to abandon my religious understanding, I like to say that my religion's in my DNA, having grown up in the South. I had to think about it a different way. And for me, thinking about it in the terms of my compassion for my fellow human being and seeing that as calling allowed me to realize that there was nothing mutually exclusive about being an abortion provider and having a Christian identity.
Did I get... Did I get this right, that you were 12 years or so into your practice of obstetrics and gynecology before you even considered providing abortion services? Is that right?
I was 12 years in and had been 12 years in the midst of wrestling with what it meant to be a women's health provider, and yet to feel conflicted about what it meant to provide the service. Someone said when you wrestle with your conscience and you lose, you actually win. So that 12 years represented 12 years of seeing women with unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or wanted but legally flawed ones, and having to say, I can refer you someplace else. And there came a point where it was no longer satisfying just to say, I have to send you somewhere else. Because what if there's nowhere else? So it was 12 years of soul searching, and eventually, whereas some people have to become comfortable providing abortion, I became uncomfortable not providing the care when I knew what women faced.
Yeah. You're pretty comfortable in Chicago. You could have flown to the South on the weekends and days off and stuff like that, I guess. What was the decision like deciding I've got to go back home?
Yeah. I was even more comfortable in Hawaii. But it was twofold. One, for personal reasons, my younger brother became seriously ill, and to the point of I thought we might lose him. And so I decided, not that I was going to become his doc, but I wanted to at least be his cheerleader around turning his tide towards health, and if not, spend some quality time with him. But I'd also been thinking about relocating with the purpose of making myself more available where the need was. 88% of women live in a county with no abortion provider. And when I flew down, I also jokingly say it was my decision to abandon the Harriet Tubman model of abortion care. You know, Harriet Tubman, when she found freedom, she would swoop down to the South, help a few people, and go back. And I felt like the Harriet Tubman of abortion care. So I decided that I would go and live in the South and make myself more readily available, because I realized that if I wasn't in Chicago, it didn't mean that women wouldn't have access to abortion. But if I wasn't in Alabama on a day that I committed to, that meant that day women wouldn't have services. So I wanted to go and make myself more readily available and regionalize the work. And what I also want to do is I want to, in my mind, right-size the risk. People weren't living in the South or practicing in the South because they were more afraid of what might happen to them based on the domestic terrorism. I mean, frankly, people have been killed. People have been harassed. And I began to take inspiration from the civil rights movement, in particular, Freedom Summer of 1964, where people moved into Mississippi to fight for franchise, understanding that people could not actualize their citizens' rights unless they had the right to vote. And so there were people who moved to Mississippi to directly challenge the right of people to be registered to vote. And I decided, and there was risk with that. And so I decided that I would not allow my fear of what would happen to me to be actually worse than what would actually happen to me. So it was a combination of wanting to be near my brother, and also to kind of figure, if I can be from the South, be a black man pushing the boundaries on the basis of just human rights and dignity, and do that and find a sense of community, then maybe other people would figure that, oh, well, if I am really burdened by the lack of access here, maybe if I go, what I'm afraid might happen to me, maybe it won't happen. So I won't let my fear be greater. I won't let the theoretical risk be greater than the actual one. And so for me, I've been quite comfortable being home and providing care. I think the greatest threat to my life at this point of living in the South is Southern cooking. And the food in the South will kill you, but you'll die happy.
There's that moment in the film where the protester is shouting at you from beyond the fence. Now, you must get that all the time. And I've heard you talk about how it seems like you're intent on not taking it personally. Talk about your reaction to those when those things happen to you.
Well, I'm clear-headed about why I do what I do, and I'm clear-headed about when people attack me personally. It's tactical; it's not personal. They're attacking me directly, but indirectly they're attacking women. They're trying to intimidate me. If they can't dissuade a woman from going to the KUER, if there's no provider, there's no care. So I kind of put the attack on me, most of which have been verbal or implied threats. There's never been an actual physical attack on me. I put it in the context of, especially, for example, in Mississippi, where there's one clinic in the whole state, and women may have to drive anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to have a visit with me. First, to be counseled face-to-face, and then wait 24 hours before they can have their procedure. And in order to get to me to have that counseling, they have to pass by people who will track them from 2 blocks away if they park remotely from the clinic, and step by step berate them and cajole them as they come to the clinic. I figure if women can go through all of that to get there, I just want to make sure that there's somebody there to provide. And so I don't let I try not to let my sense of offense be greater than their determination to get there. And so what they say to me always dulls in comparison. I'm very anti-bullying, and I feel that women get bullied for pursuing just their human rights. And so it's an empowerment for me to show up and to do my work in an open manner. I feel like you can't be chased if you're not running. I'm not hiding. If you're doing something criminal, you should behave like a criminal. The work that I do is honorable. It's necessary. And I wasn't ashamed to deliver babies for 20 years or to do gynecologic surgery. And I'm not ashamed to provide this type of care for women.
We have 2 microphones here, by the way, for those who have questions for Dr. Parker. You jumped right up.
Sorry. Hi, my name's Kelly. I'm a local advocate for Planned Parenthood. Me and my friend that came tonight, we're both president and co-president of the Students for Choice Club at Utah Valley University. And Utah is a very politically charged and religious state, and we're currently having ongoing battles concerning reproductive rights right now in our legislation. So I was just curious if you have any advice for all of us, because I'm sure all of us care about this issue, and especially me as an advocate, what we can do in a state that is so religious, and wanting to reach out to those people who are religious and being able to have good communication with them without breaking barriers or burning bridges. What would be your advice for what we can do in order to still fight for women's rights, but also relate to those type of people?
Talk to you're talking about how you relate with your religious friends who... Yeah.
Well, that's a very important question, and thank you for what you do, and thank you for that question. I think the first thing is your willingness to engage with people who think differently from you. The Mahatma Gandhi said you can't shake hands with a closed fist, and that honest disagreement is the beginning of progress. So if you can engage people in a genuine way to say, I know that we don't agree. And one of the most powerful scenes in the movie, Gandhi, was the viceroys and the Raj from when India was a British colony. They were there to meet with Gandhi, and Gandhi was late. And so they were just berating him, that skinny Hindu faker with a loincloth. And Ben Kingsley, who channeled Gandhi, who became Gandhi as far as I'm concerned, he shows up and he's apologetic. He says, I apologize. I know your time is valuable. I know someone of your stature meeting with someone like me, that you had to wait must have been offensive to you. He said, I respect that. He says, I know that we disagree, but let us not let our disagreement on issues stand in the way of our respect for each other as human beings. And so it's that principle that I seek to honestly disagree with people who oppose. And when it comes to the whole religious question, I think religion is a very private and personal thing. But to the extent that this question and this issue has become political and religious at the same time, I'm quite comfortable engaging on the topic of religious understanding, not to debate theology, but it's to say that you're a person of conscience and so am I. I'm willing to be in relationship and to honestly disagree with you. But the ground rules are that we have to have mutual respect. So I would say that Dr. King used to also say one of the ways you can maintain that respect is to make sure that you always have opponents and not enemies. If you have opponents, when I sit down across the chessboard from somebody, I have an opponent. I want to win the game, but I don't want to decimate the person playing me. In this issue, you are even fighting for the rights of the people who oppose you. So you cannot see them as enemies, simply as opponents. So if there's any animus, let it be from their side. But people feel really uncomfortable being rude and mean to you when you're treating them with kindness and respect. So I would say, one, make sure that you don't have any enemies and only opponents. Two, make sure that you have honest disagreements. And three, be willing to be uncomfortable if it means that you're going to ultimately end up in a better place. So the first thing you can't do is say those people are crazy, right?
Oh, darn it.
So, that's just how I approach and I walk through, because that's as much protective for me. I don't want to become that which I hate. I don't want to become dogmatic and dismissive of people when that's part of the problem. I maintain the notion that I could quite possibly be wrong, and so could they. The problem isn't that they think they're right. The problem is that they can't figure out how they could possibly be wrong. And so your goal is to make sure that you don't become that way.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything you do for women.
Sure. Thanks.
Hi. I am not religious. I don't believe there's a God, heaven or hell. But I am for men's rights, women's rights, children's rights, human rights, and animal rights, the rights of the world. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Jesus, actually, are my heroes because they put their life where they believed. They believed in nonviolence. I believe abortion is violent. I believe abortion is like a felony. It's murder because it's premeditated. It's not even manslaughter. It's premeditated. Unfortunately, I have a few grandchildren who I'll never know because they have been aborted. I believe there's another choice. I believe there are people in this world who would be willing to raise these children so that these women do not have to be mothers. I enjoyed being a mother. Their choice is to not be a mother, but I don't think their choice is to kill an innocent being. And that's what you do when you abort.
Do you also think that a 13-year-old girl who's been gang raped should go through the process?
Yes, I do. I believe she should go through the pregnancy and then immediately give up the child if she does not want to have that child.
Okay. Did you have anything more to say? Because let's get a response.
You have a question? Do you have
Did you have a question, or was that just a comment, which is fine?
It's a comment, and it's something to let you know that there is another choice besides that. Women's rights have the right to their own body, and they chose, most of these women, to do something where they could get pregnant. That's where their choice stops.
Right. Do you believe a woman has a right to have an abortion?
No.
Okay.
Nope. Because that's murder.
I want to, as I said earlier, you give me the chance to model what I said to her. Honest disagreement is the beginning of progress, and I respect wholeheartedly and deeply, and I respect and I appreciate your coming to the podium. I think what I would have to say is there are multiple points on which we disagree, but one point I want to point out to you is many of your statements started with I, and it was that the empowerment and the agency that you have to be able to stand and to state what your feelings are and the utility you have for parenting, for giving birth, and the ultimate empowerment is that everything about our system should empower you to be able to say I, and that's what I feel and that's what I believe. In the same regard, there are women who don't think and believe and feel the same way you do. With regard to terms like murder and child, murder is a legal term, and you articulated some of the criteria for declaring murder. You also talked about, you used the term child and person, and you talk about unborn children. You infer that the pregnancies that were terminated by one of your relatives may have been your grandchild. And so where we differ, child murder, those are legal terms, they're not scientific terms, and they're not medical terms. I'm a physician, I'm a medical personnel, and my goal when I engage with a woman is to apprise her of her options around making decisions that are based on her health and her well-being, and the medical determination of terms like, you talk about a child, until you give birth, a pregnancy that is still inside of a woman's body is a fetus. And the culture around whether or not a fetus and a child are the same thing, in a nation of laws where child is a cultural term and it means different things to different people, not that being a child means different things, but in this country, we have not conferred human rights on fetuses. An unborn pregnancy is a fetus. Until a woman gives birth, no matter what gestational age, it is not a baby. And the reason I say that is because when you say a term like baby, it has a lot of value to it. When you say baby, it means that when I end a pregnancy, what people envision is that I removed from a woman's body a life entity that has the same value as a baby in a bassinet. The reality is 88% of women who end their pregnancies do so at 12 weeks. That is not a viable situation outside of the womb. And so you and everybody else and I am allowed to feel how we feel about when life begins, but personhood begins with birth, right? And you cannot murder a fetus. You can only murder a person, right? Now, the reason I make that distinction, and I do it with total respect, is because when you say murdering a person, if we confer personhood on fetuses, then it would be right to consider bringing a charge about murder with abortion. But we have not done that. And until we do that, we can't talk about murder or not. But with regard to the moral weight, I haven't even said about when life begins. You may say life begins at conception. I say life begins before conception. Life is a process and is not an event. Sperm is alive, eggs are alive. You can't have a dead egg and a dead sperm and get a live fetus, okay? So life begins long before conception. Personhood, at least from a legal standpoint, begins at birth. We can argue about, or we can debate respectfully about that. Let me flip the question around to you. You say a fetus is a person. We can debate that. What I want you to tell me is when is a woman not a person? When does a woman lose her right to bodily integrity and to make her own decisions, even when you don't agree? If I had an interest in that required you to do something on my behalf that you didn't want to do, why can't I force you to do for me something that's in my best interest? Because you're a person and you have rights, and it's not my ability to compromise those rights. That's the distinction I was making about a fetus is not a person. It does not have any rights independent from the woman carrying it.
That's a shame.
Well, and so we can disagree on that, and the way that we would resolve that disagreement would be we have a political process. If you really believe that to be the case, then you should work vigorously to require the law to declare that fetuses are people and that to end of pregnancy is murder. And there are people who agree with you, and they're actually trying to do that. But until they do, I will continue to respect the agency of a woman to make a decision about the process that's going on in her body. And you and I will respectfully disagree. And I appreciate the spirit in which you asked your question and the respect that you've shown me to hear me out.
Thank you.
You shouldn't be a doctor of medicine, you should be a doctor of philosophy. In your opening statement, you mentioned religion and your personal religious beliefs and how you came about them, and you mentioned DNA. And I can't help in all these discussions and looking at the movie is seeing people on the other side of the fence using the same points and the same arguments and the same reasoning to validify their position on the issue. And all we're doing is taking two different positions, using the same type of reasoning to support our individual place where we are on any discussion that we engage in, whether it's abortion or gay rights or segregation or whatever it is. And there usually are two views, and we don't know how they come about. We claim reason has a reason for our own individual perspective. If we understood the perspective and where it came from, we may understand the basis for the reasoning. I would suggest, and this is what we're looking at right now, is in genetics. That variations in philosophy are based in our genetic makeup. If you look at the states and the different places where the different opinions and the strong opinions, they are usually in one locale. That would suggest patterns of behavior related to geography. And geography can be linked in a lot of ways to genetics. So in the state of Utah here, we're just starting an initial effort, and I loved your perspective on this, is that we're trying to bring people with different perspectives together to start a different kind of dialogue about why we think the way we do. So, but I loved how this all came down, and ultimately what I feel, and I'd like to have your input on this, is that even if the perspectives come about by genetics, it still entitles us each to our own choice. We just have to know the basis for the choice.
Well, I appreciate your question. It's a very nuanced one, but one of the things...
Did you hear a question in that? Don't. You were great.
Tell me what you think.
And what I hear is your questioning is the tension that exists about perspectives and ideas where the genetics correlate with the region, which is giving away, because now almost no place is genetically homogeneous enough that you would be able to correlate regionality with genetics. But one of the things that I want to speak to is the notion of that pro-life and pro-choice a very problematic dichotomy around reproductive rights is a matter of opinion. That to me feels like a false equivalency. It's really not pro-life and pro-choice. It is anti-abortion and pro-choice. And what I mean by that, I am both pro-life and pro-choice, but not in the political sense. When I am providing abortion care, I'm in support of a woman's life. And when as an obstetrician, when a woman was pregnant and she wanted to be, I would help her bring forth the life that she was carrying, right? So if the question is, if a woman does not agree, if a woman decides she doesn't want to continue a pregnancy, or if she does, what should be the default position? It should be that a woman should be left to make whichever of those decisions that she wants. And it shouldn't be our ability to disagree with whichever decision she made should allow us to have leverage in her decision-making. So in other words, if you're a pro-natalist or you're pro-birth, and you think women shouldn't end abortion, the default should be that that woman should still have the right to make the decision to end a pregnancy in full view and full respect of your opinion. And so I think it's a false equivalency to reduce to say, this is a matter of opinion. Some people agree with abortion, some people don't, and so it's controversial. The default has to be the people who agree with abortion should be able to have one, and the people who don't agree should be able to not have one. And the people who don't agree should have no bearing on the people who agree.
Okay, let me just say something. We'll probably not have time to get to everyone's question.
And I'll shorten my answers.
No. But I'll underline the word question.
Yes.
Have a question.
I have a question. Can you address her point about adoption and why some of these people choose not to go that way?
So adoption is, I appreciate you bringing that up, because when I call non-directive counseling, every woman has 3 choices, but really every woman has 2 choices. If she's pregnant, she can continue her pregnancy or she can end the pregnancy. Adoption is a decision you make once you decide that you're not ready to parent, but you also are unable to end the pregnancy. Parenting is you continue a pregnancy and you parent, right? Abortion is you're not ready to parent and you know that you would not have the emotional wherewithal to relinquish a pregnancy if you gave birth. For some people, that is cultural. Black women who had their reproduction commodified, had their babies taken from them. Native American women who had their babies taken from them because they were living on a reservation and they were deemed unfit to parent, have a different cultural relationship about relinquishing parental rights when it comes to ending a pregnancy. They'd rather not continue a pregnancy than to bring forth a child that they could never bring themselves emotionally to give away. So adoption is not the panacea or is the alternative to abortion. It is only a viable option for someone who's decided to continue a pregnancy, not someone who's decided to end one. The second thing is that adoption is offered as a false solution to the people who are disproportionately in a position to consider abortion, namely Black women and Latinas. 40% of Black children, 40% of the children in foster care are Black babies who never get adopted. So there are Black women who understand the reality is if they gave birth to a child and that child ended up in the foster system and for 18 years had no one to have ownership or have a sense of place or meaning, for you who oppose abortion at every essence, you may think it's better to be alive and to figure out where you fit and figure out why somebody gave you away. But some people would figure that it's better to never been born than to live in existential crisis around someone giving you away. There's a movie called Amistad where there's a very powerful scene of a woman who's been captured and gives birth in the midst of the Middle Passage. And during an uprising on the ship, they were bringing them above board for about 2 weeks. They would hose them off, a little sunlight. And the men on the ship created a ruckus. This woman with her babies in her arms, while the ruckus was going, very stealthily slid over to the edge of the ship. And before anyone could get to her, she flipped overboard and killed herself and her baby. Now, some people would say she didn't have a love for life, or maybe she figured out life as she knew it, the meaning and purpose would not exist, and whatever it was going to be, she was not willing to bring a baby into that. That is the logic of some people who end a pregnancy. So I think adoption is a viable option for someone who doesn't want a parent, but who can't bring themselves. But it is not the option for someone who's decided not to continue a pregnancy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. My question relates to several of the people in the film reference socioeconomic factors influencing women to come and utilize these clinics specifically. I'm curious if you could comment on that and maybe also speak to what it is that women in higher socioeconomic statuses are able to do to access abortion, whether you're 1 out of 3, that's referenced also in the film, applies across socioeconomic stability.
Thank you for your question. 1 out of 3 applies to women of reproductive age. 1 out of 3 women before age 45 will end a pregnancy. You can do the demographics proportionately speaking. The rates of abortion are higher for Black women and Latino women, making them the larger proportion, but the larger absolute number are white women, right? And so that means the larger absolute number are women who don't live in poverty, because the majority of white women don't live in poverty. What we know, it's really easy to make it a single factor, but most women, when they make their decision to have abortion, is multifactorial. It's a combination of several things. And so socioeconomics is just one. Certainly I've had women who said if they had the economic wherewithal, they would continue a pregnancy. But when you live in a society that, while it's telling you you can and shouldn't abort a pregnancy, but at the same time, it's cutting off all the vital social support systems that you would need to parent that child, it's a dilemma. So most women aren't exercising choice, they're resolving a dilemma. I define dilemma as when you have two outcomes equally odious to you, but you don't have the liberty of not choosing one of them. And so choice, I think, is an antiquated framework for people who are living in abject poverty and under austere circumstances.
As a woman who actually received an abortion here in Utah, I wanted to ask you, as a provider, it showed a little bit about how you approach women and when you walk into a room, but here, my provider was not of the compassion that you obviously possess, and the nurse was. But my question to you is I have two, sorry. Yeah. But one is, could you speak to your compassion about approaching women during the procedure, whether it be your touch, whether it be your voice, the things that matter in that room, but as well as a community, how we can break down and communicate with one another, like you said, in a respectful manner that labels like murderer, or because I feel like that's what's missing is I am not ashamed of my abortion, and it took me 10 plus years to admit that to myself. But I really respect what you said. I was very angry the entire time I was watching this film until, that brave woman came up and had that disagreement of probably the majority of people in this room, and I realized that my hatred just kind of left at that moment, because there's a person behind those statements, just like me, so.
First of all, thank you for the generosity of sharing the story and rejecting any attempt to project onto you stigma and shame because of your decision to take care of yourself and to exercise your agency that you are allowed to do. It's by my theology, that's a God-given right. Dr. King said that human rights are rights that are neither conferred by nor derived from the state. We can't give you your humanity, you have it. I've simply decided as an abortion provider to honor that and to honor your agency and to provide that care. The compassion comes from embracing that humanity and recognizing that I want for you what I want for myself. I like to think that someone would provide me with the assistance that I need to live my values and my conviction. I challenge by example my colleagues to model. I try to model the approach that I think women deserve to receive compassionate, respectful care. I always am mindful to make sure that I realize that I'm not doing a woman a favor by doing an abortion for her, and that I don't need her to be grateful to me. I don't make women into angels. Women who become pregnant, they're not angels because they're pregnant and they weren't angels before. So, their personality, I'm human too, right? But I try to make sure that if someone's frustrated or if they're emotionally volatile, I try to not let it be about me, and I try to deepen my level of compassion so that whatever way I'm being taxed by the challenging person who needs my care, that there's more than enough capacity to take in her anger, her frustration, her fear, and to give out a touch of humanity. And so I would challenge all of us who provide this care to realize that we're not doing women a favor when we do this care. And I think if you approach people with the sense that they deserve the care that you're providing for them, then you're less likely to feel insulted by what feels to you like ingratitude. But I do think that what has to happen with the lay diplomacy is what happened when you saw this woman and the compassion you had for her differing, and your inability to vilify her because she represented a position that maybe at one point vilified you, is the start of honest disagreement and progress.
So there's obviously a lot of extreme views expressed in the film, and I think kind of the most comes from the woman who says, like, how could you be doing this? Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of wondering if you could comment on how you feel you might be treated differently because of your race as an abortion provider.
That's a fabulous question. First of all, I support the Black Lives Matter movement, and we will take support wherever we can get it. I didn't expect it to come from her, but we'll take it wherever we can get it. One of the things I think, the racialization of abortion, when I told you the numbers, the absolute number, most abortions occur for white women, but proportionately, as a percentage of the population, they occur proportionally, there are higher rates for black women and Latino women. I think when the attempt to racialize abortion is a very cynical tactic of picking what I call low-hanging fruit politically. The ability to feign a concern about black women and black babies and thereby to shape the narrative as if you really have a genuine concern, it exploits the discomfort that we have with race in this country. It puts them beyond the allegation of racism, because it's actually racist to take away vital services like abortion from people who need that care. when we know that the mortalities that occurred pre-Roe from abortion care, disproportionately was black and brown women, to now allege that abortion is a form of black genocide, and their notion that I'm a race traitor because I kill my own race is for soft-minded people. It's predicated upon an ahistorical narrative. It's predicated upon inflammatory language. And so I, like in many other ways, choose not to take that personally because it's really not about me. Because if the people who hurl those things at me and feign a concern about black women and black babies, they wouldn't outlaw abortion while they're defunding Head Start and getting rid of fair housing and education and childcare. So those allegations are, in my opinion, the epitome of race baiting, but I don't take them personally.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I too am pro-choice and pro-life. I chose to have 3 children, and I also chose to have an abortion. And my question is, my children are grown up, and I think I've taught them well with sex education. And here in Utah, we have a hard time agreeing on what that means in the schools. And can you address what impact sex education to our children has on the rate of abortion or the choice of abortion?
That's a fabulous question. I think knowledge is power and not knowledge is permission. Those of us who understand that people, if we believe that people are rational and they have a healthy self-interest, when we provide them with sound information and parameters about how to use information, how to think, we can trust them to make safe and healthy decisions. But for people who believe that knowledge is permission, folk don't need a how-to course in sex and sexuality. Long before we could read or write, people figured out how to have sex. That's why we're all here, right? So if we start with the premise that people are rational and that they have a healthy self-interest, and when given good information, they make good decisions, medically accurate sex education means that people will understand the appropriate use of evidence-based contraception and family planning. People will understand the role of abstaining, if that's their role. And so when people either make the choice to abstain or to use reliable methods of contraception, you don't have unplanned pregnancies. 40 to 60% of pregnancies in this country are unplanned. Unplanned doesn't mean unwanted, because well over half of those unplanned pregnancies, they are continued. But for the ones that are unplanned and unwanted, that's where abortions come from. Well, medically accurate sex education means that people will know how you get pregnant, know how to prevent pregnancy, and they will be able to decide when, whether or not, and if to become a parent. That would tremendously drop the abortion rate in this country because, again, abortions come from unplanned, unwanted pregnancies. Abortions won't hit 0, but they will achieve what we call in public health an irreducible minimum. Given that sexual reproduction has inefficiencies built into it and there will always be a need for abortion, how do we reach the irreducible minimum? I think a good start is medically accurate sex education.
First of all, I want to also say thank you so much for everything you're doing. And so I want to ask you about what I understand is there's a shortage of abortion providers, especially doctors, but there doesn't seem to be any shortage of brave individuals willing to step up to the fight in other capacities. Is there anything being done to address that roadblock that you know over that bottleneck, as it were? Or do you have any ideas as to how that problem could be addressed? Maybe scholarships with commitments to work in areas where the services are really needed, as well as, of course, more clinics to be open. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
The answer is yes. You just answered your own question. You hit a lot of the key things. But let me throw a little light on what's happening even here in Utah. For a long time, there was what we call a graying effect of abortion providers, in that the people who started providing abortions before Roe and then after Roe was legal, they continued to provide because they knew what the consequences were of there being no abortion access. Those people, as they aged for a while due to the terrorism and all of that stuff, nobody was stepping into their roles. Well, for the last 20 years, there's been a program called the a family planning fellowship that provides subsidized training for doctors in contraception and family planning to include advanced techniques in abortion care. And so there's about 25 people a year finished that program and hopefully go to places where there's need. So there's that. But even in medical school curricula, we are now requiring people who are entering the medical school as they go through medical school, abortion and family planning training are considered core competencies. So there's a program called the Ryan Residency Program for people training in women's health to learn abortion care and techniques. There's the Med Students for Choice. So at a consumer level, students who are entering medical school understand the importance of this care and its availability, who are demanding that that content be provided to them. And so the brightest students who are engaged that way are demanding that residency programs who want to compete for their presence to train there provide that training. There are parallel organizations that are rising up as well. Nursing Students for Choice. You had an undergrad chapter of people who find ways into health professions that are not physicians who are doing that care. My colleague, who I hope will come out, Dr. Dave Turok, is on the faculty at University of Utah, and he directs that program.
Let's bring him out. Dr. Turok?
Dave. Dr. Dave Turok is my mother from another brother, so don't be thrown by the complexion. But the other solution is Dr. George Tiller, who was assassinated, said abortion is not a head thing, it's a heart thing. It's a matter of willingness. It's not a very complex procedure, but it's one, technically it's not a complex procedure, but emotionally, psychically, politically, it's a very complex. And so a person has to bring all those things together to come to the forefront. One of the things that I hope for is that women, you don't have to have a medical degree to provide an abortion. By law now you do. But I long for the day where just as we have nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and other people who can be trained in a highly skilled manner to provide other aspects of healthcare, part of the shortage, the solution to the shortage would be folk who are willing to be trained to competency to provide this care, that they will be empowered to do so, and that will represent another aspect of the workforce to be distributed. So that we can change that statistic where 88% of women live in a county with no abortion provider.
I need to prepare a few of you guys to be disappointed because we're running out of time, so you may not get to your question. But would you indulge me? No, you stick around. You were waiting patiently. But since Dr. Turok's up here, would you indulge me to ask a question here? Because I wanted to get both of your opinions, actually. Okay. As you all know, on Tuesday, Utah law went into effect. The first in the country that requires doctors to provide anesthesia to women at 20 weeks or beyond. I think there's some sense, Dawn Porter and I talked about this actually on the program, whether or not this is just a South thing. And she said it's absolutely not. Is that, in effect, a trap law? And where does that Utah law come into play in terms of this issue? And Dr. Turok, you start, and then Dr. Parker, you do.
Well, let me just say, case in point, the graying of abortion providers. Thanks for the intro. It's an opportunity. I don't view this as necessarily a trap law. I think nearly all of the anti-abortion legislation that has come from the Utah House since I've lived in Utah for 18 years is just a demonstration of people's hatred of the idea that women have agency and independence and can act on their sexual freedom. And it obfuscates the real issue. And the bottom line is, if you want to reduce abortions, it's a very simple thing to do. And as an abortion provider in Utah, and there's others in the room, we have prevented many, many more abortions than all of the anti-abortion legislation that's passed in the last couple of decades. And the reason for that is we also work every day to provide people with increased access to the most effective methods of contraception. So, in my hope for the future is that we can agree to disagree on abortion and actually agree that provision of adequate and most effective methods of contraception can actually get all of our society to move forward. And we have done, I think, a pretty good job of that in Utah. A lot of people are surprised to hear that, by following that great idea of the gentleman who asked the question. And that's by having a medical student program at the university, Med Students for Choice, where people are getting educated. We have a residency training program that's allowed us to provide, in addition to some research programs, over 5,000 women in the state who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford a highly effective method of contraception, an IUD or an implant, to be able to get one. And that has saved the state's Medicaid program $15 million. So, these are no-brainer public health issues. And then we also have a fellowship training program, and we have one of our fellows I see in the audience, Ivana Thompson. These are people who've finished an OBGYN training program and are spending 2 years to become future leaders in family planning and experts in family planning care and abortion provision, and to go on and lead local, national, and regional programs to train more people. So it is happening, and we have a huge community nationally through all of those steps. And this is not a job that people show up to because it's easy. It's a job they show up to because they're passionate about it and have a lot of compassion for the work. And Willie has done a phenomenal job of being the benchmark for that.
I think I do think that the 20-week fetal anesthesia is a trap law, in that literally targeted regulation of abortion providers, that people are looking at the content of medical practice and trying to use it as a specific vehicle to decrease the access to abortion care. In this case, on the basis of junk science, and it's an indirect way of conferring personhood on the fetus. I wasn't being dismissive or lighthearted in insisting on a scientific and a medical definition when I talk about prior to a birth process, a fetus is not a person. I think the fact that, for example, just to give a little bit of clarity, the insistence of providing anesthesia to a woman having an abortion beyond 20 weeks implies that a fetus can feel pain at 20 weeks. The science that we know is that less than 29 weeks, a fetus does not have the structures to carry a pain signal. I bring up that very incontrovertible scientific fact is, if that is indeed the science by every recognized faculty, where's the legitimacy around requiring a woman to receive a medication that has no benefit to her and potentially a harm because anyone can react to any medication? If I tell you that there's no scientifically valid basis for that, and yet you can pass a law to require it, it becomes a means of denying that woman her right to a procedure by indirectly conferring the right to a fetus that she is carrying.
I don't know how much people are aware of this. There was a little bit of press coverage on this when this was happening. So the actual law mandates that before a woman who is 20 weeks or greater in the state of Utah has an abortion, she must be told and receive anesthesia for the fetus. And as Dr. Parker was saying, there's essentially in the central nervous system, there is the connection between the peripheral nervous system and central nervous system does not exist. There is no ability to connect those two prior to far beyond 20 weeks. It was demonstrated very clearly that this was not at the time the legislation was being discussed about truth or protection of women or fetuses. It was really just about the ability to put your stamp on the hatred of the idea of abortion. And this is why I know this. So the bill was introduced, and this outraged a lot of physicians. And there was actually a group of maternal fetal medicine physicians from Intermountain Healthcare who went to the legislature, really stepped out of their way. These are not the people who present themselves when the standard anti-abortion legislation comes up, but they were really offended by the idea that the legislators were telling them what they had to do. And these were people with very substantial local conservative bona fides, including LDS bishops, BYU graduates, Mormon missionaries, the whole deal. And these are people I know. Like, these are phenomenal doctors. They are incredibly skilled, incredibly bright, and compassionate people. And they're, some of them were real conservatives. They went to the legislature and testified at the committee hearings and said, you are telling me to lie to my patients. And you don't want a doctor who's going to lie to your patients. That's bad medicine. And they were summarily dismissed, rudely, actually. And that, to me, really clearly spelled this out, that this is not about an exchange of ideas. It's about ideology. And it's going out of your way to not listen when you have true experts at your disposal. That was really instructive to me. And I think if we're going to make any progress on this, we got to do exactly what Willie's talking about, and it's engage people in civil discourse and find out what the actionable common ground is.
I just wanted to ask if you've written anything about your philosophy and your approach to what you do, or if you would
write a book, Willie. Write a book. Is that what you're saying?
Funny that you should say that. I have not. I'm trying to write some stuff. I do have there will be a book that will have some of my philosophy coming out in January. I think it's going to be called Life's Work. So I am working on that.
Thank you.
Let me say, sometimes you never know what you're going to get in terms of the questions from the audience. You guys were great. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Dr. Turok, thank you so much. Willie Parker, ladies and gentlemen. You have a small one?
Yeah. Come.
All right. That's Dr. Parker who did that, not me, by the way. Go ahead.
I just was really concerned about the funding. I noticed that funding was a really big issue, and I'm wondering where it comes from and where you think it should come from.
What funding?
For clinics, abortion clinics.
I'm sorry, say it again. For
abortion clinics.
Well, the funding comes largely from because women are not allowed to use their insurance, or even poor women who rely on Medicaid for their assistance. There's a funding restriction called the Hyde Amendment. Abortion is largely funded by private sources, and which is a shame because abortion is health care.
Yeah.
And women are required to make the decision to pay for an abortion with their own resources, which is a shame.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks all.